Okay, so we're going to look at exchange rate theory now. Uh, there are many different theories in economics about exchange rates, and in fact we should normally incorporate exchange rate theory into some kind of macroeconomic model. But I'm going to keep it really simple here, and I'm just going to look at one of the theories. So to illustrate it, imagine that you live right on the border between here you are here. You live right on the border between the United States and Canada, Quebec and Vermont, let's say, in one of these places, these towns where like the border goes right through a street. So you get up and you want to have some yogurt in the morning, let's say. What choices do you have? Well, you can go to Provigo, which is in Quebec, or you could cross the border and go over to Hannaford, or what is it, Publix, or one of these American grocery stores, and buy the yogurt there. I'm going to ignore the difference in quality. That I'm going to say it's the same yogurt wherever you happen to buy it. So make your decision, because literally you can cross the street. Where would you go to purchase it? Well, to make the decision, what information do you need to have? And if you think about this a little bit, there's three pieces of data that you'd need. First of all, you'd need to know the price of yogurt in Canada. Secondly, is you'd have to know the price of yogurt in the United States, and keep in mind then it would be in US dollars. And then finally, you'd need to know the exchange rate. Now, what follows below, I'm going to keep using this notation. P represents the price in Canadian dollars. P star represents the price in US dollars, and E is the exchange rate. Now, quick point about the exchange rate before I carry on is there are kind of like two ways of quoting or indicating the exchange rate. One is known as the direct quote, the other one is known as an indirect quote. Uh, Almost everywhere in the world outside of really Canada and the United Kingdom, and I guess maybe Australia, they use the indirect quote. So frequently in Canada, you'll see that the Canadian dollar is at 70 cents or 71 cents, 73 cents, something like that. That actually is an indirect quote. The direct quote, which is the way we do it in economics, is the letter E, and it's the Canadian dollar price or the domestic price of one unit of a foreign currency. In all the cases below, I'm going to keep using the United States as a foreign currency. So at present, the exchange rate in Canada is $1.40, meaning to say it costs $1.40 Canadian to purchase one US dollar. And this is what's called the direct quote. So what is the theory we're going to look at? It's called purchasing power parity, and it actually, or just simply PPP. And there are different versions of purchasing power parity. I'm going to look at the simplest one that's known as absolute purchasing power parity. Keep in mind, this is a theory, and as I said, normally this would be incorporated into some kind of larger macroeconomic model, but stick with this. Absolute purchasing power parity is also known as sometimes as the law of one price. And it's not really a law, it's a theory. But in any event, the theory is so simple, here it is. We take E, the exchange rate, and then we take P star, which is the foreign price, and I said we'll keep using the US dollar price for that, and divided by P, which is the Canadian price, and it's equal to 1. So it's extremely simple theory. Take this number, multiply by this number, then divide it by this number, and you get 1. So let's test this theory to see if it's true. And to do it, to test the theory, I'm going to use a Big Mac. And one reason for using a Big Mac is because it's the same. So we don't have to worry about issues of quality. It's not like yogurt where it could be better here, or I prefer American Canadian milk or something. It's a Big Mac, and it literally is the same everywhere in the world. It is true that eating a Big Mac in one place, like on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, is not quite the same as eating a Big Mac at a McDonald's in, I don't know, in Anjou. But we'll ignore that difference. So what I need to know is the price of a Big Mac, for example, in the United States, in New York, price of a Big Mac in Montreal, and then I need to know the current exchange rate. I did a bit of research here, economic research, and I went to a McDonald's. And this is what I found. I found that the price in Canada is $6.77. We can debate about whether that includes taxes or not. This is the number I got. The price of a Big Mac in New York City, New York, I got this on the internet, is $5.67. Keep in mind that's US dollars. And then finally, the current exchange rate is 1.4, meaning to say it costs, if you want to buy one US dollar, it costs $1.40 Canadian. So let's put all these numbers together and see if we can figure out whether the theory, this absolute purchasing power parity theory, works or not. So you'll notice here that what I did was I took keep in mind, E is 140, so I take this number, put it here, and that's it here. Then I put the 567, put it here, and then I put 677 down below, and then I put all that into a calculator, and I came up with this number, 1.173. Now, in theory, this is supposed to equal 1, but it doesn't. So we can see here, well, I guess the theory is not correct. It's not the first time that a theory would be incorrect, but it's wrong. But to think about this a little bit further, what would I have to do to make the theory correct? In other words, if I wanted to, what would I have to do? I would have to make the US dollar price lower. I'd have to reduce it. If I made this number here smaller, then eventually this would be equal to 1, which tells us that at present, the price of a Big Mac in the United States is too high, which also tells us something, that it's cheaper to buy a Big Mac in Canada. In fact, the basis of this whole theory, absolute purchasing power parity, is the idea that it should equal 1 because it shouldn't really matter where you buy your yogurt or Big Mac. You should be indifferent between the two. Economists like things like this. We refer to it as an equilibrium, in which you do it, you don't do it, you don't really care. But clearly the theory is not correct, and the reason for it is that the US dollar price is too high, which says that, in effect, it's cheaper to buy them in Canada, which means if you were an American living in Plattsburgh, it'd be worth it to drive up to Montreal and buy your Big. Hey, you could do something else. You could buy Big Macs in Montreal, put them in a truck, and drive down to the States and sell them, and you'd be able to make a profit. So instead of taking this theory, testing it, I'm going to use it now as a way to predict the future. So you'll notice something here. What I've done is I've changed the E here to this, put this little hat circumflex on top of it, which means it's a prediction. So I'm not going to say that it's the current market. I'm just going to say this is my prediction, and I'm going to assume this is true in the future. When all these Americans start coming to Canada to buy Big Macs, eventually this is going to be a true theory. So what happens then? Well, I can, first of all, switch this around. So notice something here. I assumed it's true, and then I took the P and multiplied it at the top, took the P star, brought it down below, and now I've got a simple little formula which tells me the predicted exchange rate, E hat. So if I do it this way, I've got P, which is the US price, P star, the Canadian price. If I calculate this, I get this new number, which is my predicted exchange rate. Well, what's the current market rate? Well, the current market exchange rate, you look it up on Google if you want to, it's 1.40, which means that the current market exchange rate is greater than the predicted exchange rate. So now we can start thinking. It's like me saying at present it's 1.4. It costs $1.40 Canadian to purchase $1 US. I'm thinking that in the future it will only cost about $1.20, which means to say I think the Canadian dollar is going to gain value. So let's take a look at this. We're now at the bottom row down here because E hat is lower than E. Remember I said E hat is 1.2, 1.19. The current market exchange rate, E, is equal to 140. So I'm saying I think E is going to get smaller, which means I think the Canadian dollar is going to gain value, which means I think that at present the Canadian dollar is undervalued. So like we did before, it's cheaper to buy a Big Mac at home. That means it's cheaper to buy in Canada. In other words, I think many Americans will come to Canada and start eating our Big Macs because they're cheaper, which means our exports will increase, which means net exports will go up. And I think in the long run, the aggregate demand curve is going to shift to the right. If you want, I would write down this table. It's also available. You can download and print. It's a PDF file in the notes in Moodle. And keep in mind too that if you want, you can write down these E hat, the predicted exchange rate, the little formula. It's P over P star. In all cases, we'll be using P star as the US dollar as the foreign price, and the domestic price will depend on the country. So if you want, you can take a photo of this or pause the video and write this down on a piece of paper so you'll have as a reference.